None of the royal mistresses in the history of the French monarchy held such absolute power for as long as Diane de Poitiers did during the 12-year reign of Henry II, nor was any of them 20 years older than the king. Diane de Poitiers, born in 1499, was once predicted at birth to rule over all. Her contemporaries called her a blossoming flower of beauty. Though much older than the king, she conquered his heart forever. Most astonishingly, her beauty seemed untouched by time. Brantome, a court chronicler under Catherine de' Medici, wrote, "I saw Diane at the age of 65 and was amazed at her beauty. Every charm radiated from the face of this rare woman. I think even if she lived to be 100, she would never grow old." Some of her contemporaries even suspected she had made a pact with the devil. Catherine's position at court was tenuous. At 17, she was vulnerable. Her uncle Pope Clement had died suddenly, and half of her enormous dowry was never paid. "That girl came to me utterly naked," said King Francis. The Duke of Guise tried to promote his daughter Louise as a better match for Henry, but Catherine had no desire to divorce or leave. She truly loved Henry. She was plagued by dreams of his death. Her daughter, the famous Queen Margot from Dumas' novels, once said that whenever Catherine was about to lose a loved one, she would see a vision of enormous flames in her dreams. Legend says Catherine dreamed of Henry even before they met, a dying man lying and begging for help. When she saw Henry for the first time, she recognized the man from her visions and took it as a sign of fate. If she left, who would save him? She fell to her knees before King Francis and said, "I understand everything. I am ready to accept divorce. Just let me stay near Henry. I love him so deeply." Touched, the king promised that, come what may, there would be no royal court ruling against her. There was, however, another problem. Years passed, and Catherine still had no children by Henry. This was more serious than the unpaid dowry. Catherine was not considered attractive. One ambassador described her as having too large a mouth and pale, expressionless eyes. A perfect replica of Pope Leo X, some claimed, and resembling the Holy Father for 20 years was no compliment. Desperate, various healers proposed strange remedies: the ashes of a sage, frog water, even the urine of a mule. Others advised wearing a girdle made of goat hair soaked in milk and oil. Catherine agreed to everything, but nothing helped. The royal council advised the king to send this barren womb back to Italy at once. It was Diane who intervened and saved Catherine from being exiled. In gratitude, the Dauphine became a secret informant for her rival. Sweet and obliging by day, Catherine smiled at everyone and sought to please. But by night, she reported everything she overheard to her cherished patroness. Diane found skilled doctors for the Dauphine and convinced Henry to undergo a medical procedure. She even ensured he made regular visits to the marital bed. Why did she do this? The answer was simple. Diane's greatest threat was the possibility of Henry's divorce. A new wife could end Diane's influence entirely. After Catherine's first son was born, pregnancies followed in quick succession. In total, Catherine bore 10 children, just as the astrologers had predicted. 7 survived, including 3 future kings and 2 future queens. In gratitude for her help, Henry, upon becoming king, granted Diane an immense reward for her loyal and useful services previously rendered to the queen. Catherine de' Medici's life over the next 12 years followed a closed cycle: conception, pregnancy, childbirth. As soon as her children were born, they were taken from their mother's care, entrusted instead to the king's mistress, who oversaw their upbringing and education. Francis died in 1547, on the birthday of Henry's son, giving his son a royal gift by passing the kingdom of France to Henry II. At that moment, Catherine was 28, and Diane de Poitiers was 47. For most women, this would be an advanced age, but for Diane, it was as though the horn of plenty had overturned into her lap. Henry became king, and Diane became the most powerful woman in France. The newly crowned sovereign spared no expense for his beloved: diamonds, forests, lands, castles, vast sums of money. Diane was made Duchess of Valentinois, appointed her allies to the royal council, and held the reins of power in her hands. What kind of man was this king, who could not bear to live away from his Diane? A Venetian ambassador described Henry at age 33 as physically powerful, a great lover of bodily exercise. He added, "The king has such natural kindness that none could compare to him, not even among the most ancient princes. No one ever sees him angry unless during a hunting accident. He never uses coarse language, and for this reason, he is truly beloved." To modern viewers, Diane de Poitiers might not appear beautiful, but for her era, she embodied the ideal of feminine beauty. The prevailing standards of the time dictated white skin, hands and teeth, black eyes and eyebrows, red lips, cheeks and nails, short body, hair and fingers, narrow teeth, mouth, feet and ankles, full waist, hips and arms, and small nose, chest and head. Their three-way life continued. According to one diplomat, the king informed Diane of all current state matters, discussing tax reforms, conspiracies, and even the proper response to foreign ambassadors. Catherine, madly in love with her husband, eventually drew closer to Diane. A near friendship formed between them. Both women smiled and maintained the illusion of genuine camaraderie. Yet in truth, the queen endured countless humiliations. Even during her coronation, Diane stood beside her, cloaked in ermine and pearls. And from afar, it was unclear which of the two women was queen. During the ceremony itself, the crown proved too heavy for Catherine. One of Diane's daughters removed it from her head and placed it at her mother's feet on a velvet cushion. The queen didn't even flinch. She appeared unmoved. But internally, Catherine de' Medici seethed with powerless fury. Her real feelings toward the usurper were hard to conceal. Once, Diane innocently asked, "What are you reading, madame?" "The history of France," Catherine calmly replied. "I've discovered that it has always been women who guided the affairs of kings." Seeking to understand why her husband preferred a woman old enough to be his mother, the queen allegedly had several holes drilled in the ceiling above Diane's chambers and began spying on their intimate encounters. After watching these scenes, the queen would sigh, weep, and moan, noting that her husband never behaved with such passion in their marital bed. Nearly 30 years later, Catherine wrote to one of her daughters, "I always received Madame de Valentinois warmly, for the king forced me to do so, but I made sure she always knew it was against my deepest feelings. A wife who loves her husband can never love his whore." Henry adored Diane. He wrote her letters if they were apart, even for a day. Diane de Poitiers became the wealthiest and most influential woman in France. But in 1559, Henry died at the age of 40, wounded during a tournament, fulfilling word for word the prophecy of two astrologers, one of whom was Michel de Nostradame, better known as Nostradamus. Catherine de' Medici astonished everyone once more. At her wedding, she wore heels, introducing them to fashion. At her husband's death, she chose black mourning attire instead of the traditional white worn by queens, and adopted as her personal emblem a broken lance with the inscription, "From this come all my tears and pain." Thus began her transformation into the fearsome Black Queen remembered by history. She would wear mourning black for the rest of her long life. At this moment, Diane was 59. Catherine ordered that Madame de Valentinois never appear at court again. Saddened, Diane left the banks of the Loire and retreated to her chateau of Anet, a temple of elegance and beauty whose walls were adorned with scenes depicting her on the hunt. What was the secret of Diane de Poitiers' incredible youthfulness? How could a woman 20 years older than the king become his lifelong mistress? Diane herself liked to tell a story. As a child, she had saved an old sinner from death, and in return, he gifted her an elixir of eternal youth. Historian Guy Breton writes, When women over 30 were considered old, Diane's appearance was astonishing, hence the rumors of a magic potion. In truth, her recipe for youth and beauty was more grounded. First, good genetics. Diane came from one of the oldest noble families in France, more ancient and noble than the royal Valois line. This family instilled strict codes. One must always be well-groomed, cold and confident in demeanor, modest in gaze, soft-spoken, constant and composed, unwavering in decision. This upbringing gave Diane inner strength and clarity in judgment. To that she added discipline and common sense. When courtier Pierre Brantôme saw her at nearly 70, he was amazed. But Diane simply said, "There's nothing surprising. I rise at 6, take a cold bath, then ride on horseback for 2 hours. At 8, I return, rest briefly, eat a light breakfast and lunch, and have a small dairy-based dinner. But the most important thing is this. Every day must include something joyful, and one must fall asleep with a light heart, free from dark thoughts." So how did it happen that Henry the Quin, surrounded by numerous noblewomen and married to a peer of his own age, longed for a woman almost 20 years his senior? When Henry's father, King Francis of France, was taken prisoner by Charles V, he offered his sons as hostages in exchange for his own freedom. Thus, the Dauphin Francis and his younger brother Henry, Duke of Orléans, aged 9 and 7 respectively, were sent to an unknown land among enemies for an indefinite time. During the farewell, no one paid attention to little Henry. All focused on the future king, his elder brother. All except Diane de Poitiers. She also rarely used cosmetics and abstained from alcohol. Even when the king urged her, rumors of her beauty resurfaced years ago when the remains believed to be Diane's were tested and found to contain gold levels 250 times above normal. It appeared she had regularly consumed drinks laced with gold particles, a possible alchemical elixir of youth thought to possess rejuvenating powers. Pathologist Philippe Charlier, who examined her remains, suggested that this may have caused Diane's premature death. There is evidence that, in the months before she died, her face had turned pale, possibly from anemia due to gold poisoning. In her final months, she was visited by Brantôme, who later wrote fascinating memoirs. "I saw this woman 6 months before her death," he wrote, "and she was still so beautiful that no heart, no matter how cold, could remain unmoved. I am certain that had she lived another 100 years, her body and face would never have aged. Alas, the earth has hidden from us that magnificent form." He begged her to sell him the elixir of youth for a fortune, swearing to keep it secret. But Diane only spoke of cold water, horseback rides, and peace of mind. 6 months later, Diane de Poitiers died at the age of 66. In her will, written just 5 days before her death, she requested that her body be buried in the mausoleum at Annette, and that her heart be interred beside that of her husband. Perhaps she had indeed completed all her earthly affairs. For nearly 2 centuries the earth preserved her beautiful body untouched. But during the French Revolution, the sans-culottes stormed her crypt. They broke open her coffin and exposed Diane's body to the public. Astonishingly, it was perfectly preserved. Her corpse was thrown onto a cart, and then, in an act of barbarity, her long hair and braids were cut off and divided among the looters. Diane de Poitiers was an incomparable woman who, by sheer charm and intelligence, succeeded in turning the full might of the French monarchy to her advantage. Her lineage would go on to shape European history, producing 4 kings of France, 4 kings and queens of Spain, 4 kings of Sardinia, and 1 king of the 2 Sicilies. At the time, Diane was 27 years old, a mother of 2 girls aged 5 and 8. She approached the 7-year-old Henry, gently kissed his cheek, and whispered, "You must be strong. We will wait for you. I will wait for you." The captivity lasted 4 long years. For Henry, it was a harsh ordeal, but he read chivalric romances and often thought of Diane and her kiss. Later, he would say, "I survived the prison only to return to you. Eventually, Francis I ransomed his sons for an enormous sum, 2 million gold écus, or roughly 4.5 tons of gold. Diane and her husband were among those who contributed to the staggering ransom. When Henry returned, he saw that Diane had become even more beautiful. He was 12. She was 31. At his first tournament, Henry, then 12 years old, emerged victorious and offered his banner to Diane, publicly naming her his Lady of the Heart. 3 months later, Diane's husband, 43 years her senior, died. She wore mourning for the rest of her life, dressing only in black and white. Francis asked Diane to indulge the young Henry with a bit of playful affection. "The cursed captivity has robbed him of his smile. A drop of flirtation. That is all I ask," said the king. Diane gladly complied, accepting Henry's courtly devotion. Eventually, Henry married a girl his own age, Catherine de' Medici, a Florentine noblewoman and distant relative of Diane. At the time of their wedding, both were 14.5 years old. Behind closed doors, Henry called Catherine the Toad. The girl tried her best to make a good impression, speaking French with a charming Italian accent. But Henry's passion for Diane never waned, and Diane herself grew ever more fond of the rapidly maturing boy, younger than her own daughters. Then, unexpectedly, Henry's elder brother, the future King of France, died suddenly. For the first time, suspicion of poisoning fell upon Catherine de' Medici. Henry became the Dauphin, second only to his father at court, and Diane became truly close to him, now in every sense of the word. At this moment, Diane was 36, Henry 18, and his wife the same age. What began as platonic affection soon turned into mutual passion. Diane herself, moved by the Dauphin's intensity, fell in love with him. Around that time, Henry personally designed a monogram that was supposedly a symbol of his marriage to Catherine de' Medici. But in truth, the letters were arranged in a way that they all subtly transformed into the letter D, the initial of Diane. This monogram soon appeared on his personal weapons, then on his castles, and even on his royal mantle. The heir to the throne called Diane his lady and overwhelmed her with passionate poetry. "Alas, my God, how I regret the time I lost in my youth. How many times I dreamed that Diane would be my only mistress, but I feared that she, being a goddess, would never lower herself so far." 11 years passed between the death of Henry's beloved older brother and the demise of his much-hated father. In that time, Henry became the second most powerful man in France and the third point of a love triangle with 2 extraordinary women. How did their relationships unfold? Why did Diane want Catherine to bear Henry children? And why didn't the legendary poisoner Catherine de' Medici slip something lethal into Diane's goblet? It seems this trio found a way to coexist through a mutually beneficial arrangement, surprising everyone at court.